Welcome back, everyone, to the MMA Pick'ems podcast, and we got a pretty loaded card here. 3 title fights, and I just got to say the whole main card's actually pretty stacked. We have Anthony Smith versus Jimmy Crute opening up the main card, and a couple months ago this could have been a fight night headliner. So. Pretty good card here, and then we also have Uriah Hall, Chris Weidman going at it. As far as the preliminary card goes, pretty good as well. A lot of showcase fights on the early prelims, so overall, really solid card here. And before we get into it, we do have to do the recap here. So as far as picks go for last week, I went got 6 out of 9 correct, and from a betting perspective, did come out 1.5 units ahead, plus 1.5 units. I was pretty light. Betting card, mainly because, Stevens got a little aggressive at the stare downs and gave close whiplash. But let's dive right into some of these, the picks that I had here. So kicking off the card, I had a 0.1 unit bet on Hubbard by round 2 knockout or round 3 knockout. I initially just put 0.1 unit on the round 3 knockout prop. It was at plus 2,500, so I saw a ton of value there. And then put a little bit on their second round knockout prop a little later in the week. That was mainly a FOMO move, just in case, I thought that, Bush might start to tire after the first round, and he did, but Hubbard just didn't really have any sort of, finishing instinct there, just was content to lay in his guard and, kind of play it safe, grind out the decision there. And next fight, also had a half a unit on Kish by decision. I just thought that Cortez might have had a bad weight cut, but she was able to come out and perform, although I did think that Kish arguably won the second round there. And Cortez, she was able to go to her wrestling to just grind out the decision there as well. Let's see what else here. Mearshart, round 3 submission. Obviously, he got the submission early in that fight, but I just figured if he wasn't able to do much early in the fight, Fabinski would start to tire a little bit. Mearshart tends to be a bit of a slow starter, but Fabinski's BJJ and positional awareness is just awful, man. Like in the first round there, he had the guillotine locked up, and Fabinski just, I don't know what he was doing. The guy was doing the fucking jazz hands instead of fighting hands, and he gave up the submission pretty easily there. And that was able to cash. I did put half a unit on Mearshart by decision. Like I said in the previous episode, I did mention that if you wanted to play this, most likely Mearshart by submission or Fabinski by decision. And Mearshart was able to lock up the submission there. I think that, going forward, Fabinski is going to be a pretty easy fade against anyone who's got some decent BJJ, right? This guy just chokes big time against anyone with good BJJ. So just got to keep that in mind. And then the last prop that I did play was Arlovsky by TKO or KO. I just felt that with how much Chase Sherman moves forward, he would be able to catch him. And I just felt that Arlovsky was just way higher level striker. But, good on Sherman. He wasn't super aggressive this fight. He, kind of sat back a little bit and kind of played Arlovsky's game. So he wasn't as aggressive as I thought he would be, but Arlovsky did ultimately get the decision here. I just showed the veteran savvy that he had. And, honestly, Chase Sherman just isn't quite on that level. And, even though Arlovsky is 42, he still showed that, he's got the skills. And, yeah, that I did end up putting a 1.5 unit on Arlovsky. I wasn't a bet that I really wanted to place early in the week just because Arlovsky was too big of a favorite, but he started to drop pretty quickly. I think he dropped down to close to pick'ems near fight day, so I did put 1.5 units there, and overall did come out ahead 1.5 units on the night. And one thing I did want to touch up on, this wasn't a fight that I had any stakes in, but it was the Espino-Romanov fight, and man, that was a total bitch move by Romanov. Like, I know a ton of people are going to give him the benefit of the doubt there, but fuck that. I mean, this is the first time he came up against some adversity. The first guy, who he wasn't able to body slam and just control and ground and pound, and he looked for a way out. He gassed himself out after that first round, and he didn't want to be in there anymore. And, it sucks he got rewarded for it because I felt that Espino actually won the first and part of the third round, or at least for as long as that third round went on. And the only reason Espino lost the second round was because, he went for the guillotine and gave up, position there. So I felt that Espino should have won that. But in any case, that was a really weak move by Romanov in my part. Lost a ton of respect for him. But yeah, that'll do it for the recaps. And with that, let's get right into this card here. We have 14 fights, so we have a lot of stuff to go over. And yeah, let's jump right into it. Actually, it looks like I do have one more fight here that I forgot to recap, and that was the Gravely fight. I did put him in a parlay with someone else on this card here, and spoiler alert, it is Weili, and yeah, I mean, that was a pretty easy pick there on Gravely's part. I mean, Burchak, I thought Gravely would win by decision. I'd grind him out, wrestling with his wrestling, but Burchak, very suspect chin, possibly early stoppage, but Gravely was able to find the mark there and knock him out. So yeah, that leg of the parlay cashed pretty easily. So yeah, that'll do it for the recap for real this time. And with that, let's get right into this card. And to kick off the card, we have Johnny Munoz versus Jamey Simmons. And let's take a look at the odds real quick for this. Johnny Munoz going to be the minus 325 favorite. Come back on Jamey Simmons plus 275. And let's start with Munoz. So Munoz, as far as his stand-up goes, not particularly good. I mean, I guess it is somewhat serviceable, but against someone who could, who's got a striking base, he's not going to fare too well. He's got pretty slow hands. Defensively is a bit hittable, and he does throw a lot of spinning attacks, but this guy is primarily a grappler. Okay, so his wrestling is decent, but I'd say his BJJ is pretty high level as far as the division goes. But yeah, he's got decent top control, good guard pass. His top pressure isn't particularly good because a lot of the times I think he's just looking to get into a better position, looking to get into transitions and possibly just hunt the submission. But on top, he again, not very good top pressure and not a ton of damage. And I've seen fights where he will look to wall install. And in his fight against Nate Maness, in his debut, Maness was able to just keep the fight standing and largely just touch him up. But as far as this matchup goes, I think he's got a pretty favorable matchup in Jamey Simmons, who, Simmons, he made his UFC debut against Giga Chikadze on short notice. And, I think they're giving him another fight because, it was a short notice fight against a, decent UFC level competition. So they're giving him a little step down in competition in Munoz. But I think in this matchup, Munoz should be able to win here. But taking a look at Simmons first, and Simmons, I think he's going to be giving up some size here. He's a short, stocky guy, and he is light on his feet, but his striking is extremely wild. And in the regional tape that I've seen, he has picked up and slammed guys. He is primarily a wrestler, but yeah, I don't really see him being able to pick up and slam Munoz. I think Munoz is going to have the size and the strength advantage, and the cardio of Simmons here didn't seem too good either. In some of his other fights that I saw that got extended beyond the first round, he started to tire out a bit. And, in his fight against Terrence Almond, there was a point in that fight where I think Almond was just hanging off his arm. And, both guys are really tired. I don't know what was going on in that fight, but it looks like, Simmons doesn't really have great positional awareness too. And I don't think his BJJ is really that good. So, as far as, this matchup goes, I think that, Munoz should be able to take it. I don't think either guys are really skilled on the feet. I think the fight will likely be won and lost on the ground here. I think that Simmons might be the one who shoots for the takedown, but I wouldn't be surprised if Munoz decides to take the fight to the ground himself. I just think that Munoz will likely have a pretty significant grappling advantage. I think he'll have the BJJ advantage at least. And, being the much bigger and stronger guy, I think that Munoz will be able to kind of dictate a lot of the grappling exchanges, and I think he'll just be able to find the submission. So I'm going to go with Munoz here. I think he wins it by submission. I'm going to wait for the props to come out for it, but if I can get some good plus odds on that, I'm going to take Munoz by submission here. So the pick here is Munoz. No bet just yet, though. And in the next fight, we have Ariane Carnelossi versus Liang. And man, I just got to say, Carnelossi, her arms, she is fucking jacked. And, before we get any further, we just got to dive into the odds real quick. Carnelossi is minus 175 favorite. Comeback on Liang is plus 150. And let's start with Carnelossi first. So aside from her just absolutely jacked physique, she's primarily a striker, really likes to blitz forward, starts really aggressively, and likes to move forward and just throw those hooks of hers. And she does overextend a bit. We have seen her get clinched up after throwing those looping combos of her. But overall there just isn't a ton of tape on her, so wasn't able to get too much footage on her. But I do have a decent idea of, her fighting style and, what she likes to do. And taking a look at her opponent, Liang, again, not too much tape on her either, but from what I've been able to find, it does look like she likes to grapple, which, is very interesting coming from, a fighter coming out of the Asian regional scene. A lot of the time you see these, fighters, they're primarily strikers, but to see someone who likes to really look to grapple and wrestle, so a good change of pace here. But yeah, in the fights that I've seen from Liang, she really just likes to shoot for the takedown early. I think in one of the fights, she was on the single leg within like the first 5 seconds. And, on the ground, she's pretty good in scrambles. And it looks like she really likes to go to that arm bar. But, overall, I'd say her grappling is still pretty green. She does get a little sloppy in there, tends to overextend a little bit as well. But, she is primarily a grappler from what I've seen. And something I do want to point out, though, is she's been getting a lot of her opponents out of there early in that first round, and she's been fighting really low-level fighters, so that's definitely a bit of a concern there. But if you take a look at some of the losses on her record, though, a lot of them are against, I'd say, decent-level competition, or at least fighters who have made it, the next step into a better promotion or organization. Like, we see with Lilia Shakarova. I don't know if she's UFC caliber quite yet, but she has fought in the UFC. And Juliana Velasquez, solid fighter in Bellator, and Maria Agapova, so and also another decent prospect in the UFC right now. So as far as level of competition goes, I'd say it's relatively even. I might just edge it out for Carnelossi because she's at least fought in the UFC, whereas Liang is making her UFC debut. And I think just overall level of regional talent, I think Carnelossi might have a bit of an advantage there, but not really certain about that. But as far as how this fight will go, I'm going to favor Liang a little bit more. Even though, she's still pretty green, I think that with her offensive grappling, she seems pretty relentless with it. So I don't think she's going to be the type of fighter to give up after the first or second takedown. I think, as someone who is, primarily a grappler, I expect her to, look to chain wrestle and really just get this fight to the ground as soon as she can. And, it's not going to be easy because Carnelossi, she's a very stocky, strong fighter. So I think Liang will have a difficult time getting her to the ground initially. But I think as the fight goes on, I think Carnelossi will slow down a bit. But I'm not convinced that Liang has the greatest gas tank either, especially since we haven't really seen her past the second round. But I think that if she is able to land a few takedowns, get top control, I think she can make this a very grindy sort of fight. And we haven't really seen enough from Liang's stand-up to say that, Carnelossi has her beat, but I think Carnelossi should have the advantage in the striking. I mean, she is the stronger fighter. She might be a bit quicker as well, but we haven't seen enough from Liang to say, she won't be able to stand and trade. But I think with how Carnelossi extends on a lot of her, striking and combinations, I think that Liang might have an opportunity to just, time that level change and get her down that way. But yeah, I'm going to side with Liang here. I think this is a pretty low level fight, but the pick here is Liang. And as far as a bet goes, I might put a little bit on Liang by decision. She's, seems to be a submission specialist, but I don't think she'll be able to pull off an armbar on Carnelossi here. I mean, Carnelossi, her arms are just way too thick and muscular for Liang to pull off that armbar, in my opinion. So the pick here is Liang, and might put a quarter of a unit on her by decision, but we'll see. And moving right along, we have Jeff Molina versus Qileng Aori. All right, so this is a fight where not a ton of tape on either guys, but from what I've seen so far, it looks like both guys are primarily strikers, like to move forward, very aggressive, and, not too good defensively. So where it is lined right now, as far as the odds go, pretty much a pick 'em. We have Aori at minus 118 and Molina at minus 102. So yeah, pretty close fight as far as, odds go. And I tend to agree, just because we don't have too much tape here, and with how how both of these guys fight, I think this could just be a coin flip. Whoever I think is able to land clean or catch the other guy is most likely going to be the winner here. But yeah, so from what I've seen from Aori or so far, he's pretty wild with his shots. Again, he likes to move forward, and he does seem to have a bit of power in his shots as well. Not too high of an output, but that's kind of how guys who have a lot of power tend to fight. They aren't looking to put on a crazy pace or anything. They'll look to just kind of pick their shots and hopefully land a little harder than their opponent, get him out of there. As far as Molina goes, his strikes are a little bit loopy, but it does look like he does have a bit of sting in some of his shots. And, he's got pretty good counter striking as well. We'll mix it in with some leg kicks. But I have seen him countered pretty hard as well, since he does throw a lot of those naked leg kicks. He is a bit hittable as well, and does seem to put on a pretty solid pace. I mean, his cardio seems to check out. Is able to, have pretty decent output over the course of 3 rounds. And, I think this fight will be pretty back and forth, pretty high-paced fight in my opinion. Should be a banger, honestly. As far as the pick goes, I'm going to go with Molina. I think he's just a little more well-rounded with his striking. I guess, with Aori, he's probably a little more crisp, a little more, I guess, accurate, but I can't even say that with much confidence. I just think that, Molina, he can mix it up a little better on the feet, and, he does have higher output. So if Aori isn't able to land, a hard shot on him to really sway the round or even get the knockout, I think Aori's got, a slimmer path to victory, essentially. Aori does have a bit more experience, but I can't really trust this, Asian regional scene, mainly, this WLF Wars promotion. I'm not really sure what the level of competition there is like, but I think that it's probably not as good as the regional promotions here in the US, at least. And then, I do favor the training camp that Molina is coming out of, so I slightly edge it out for Molina, but this is a pretty low-level fight in my opinion. And, one angle that I might be looking at for this fight is possibly the under, or fight does not go to decision. It'll really come down to, I guess, the odds there, but we'll have to wait for those. They're not out yet for me, but when they do open up, I might put something on that, because at the end of the day, this is a pretty low-level fight. Both guys have pretty bad defense and are both pretty aggressive and are pretty hittable. So there's a good chance this might not go to a decision, but this is also a flyweight fight, and the finishes don't happen that frequently here. So a little bit to consider there, but as far as the bet goes, I don't think I'll be betting this fight. But the pick here is going to be Molina. And in the next fight, we have Rong versus Rodrigo Kazula Vargas. And taking a look at the odds real quick, we have Rong coming in at minus 250, come back on Vargas at plus 210. And taking a look at Rong first, I'll just call him Zhu. He appears primarily to be a striker. He's pretty light on the feet, has a good body kick, but, doesn't really seem to have high output. But this guy does pick his shots pretty well and has pretty decent power from what I've seen. However, he's still pretty green as far as his defensive grappling goes. The guy is only 21 years old, but has 20 professional fights. So he's been doing it for quite a while. And, but yeah, in a number of his fights, or not a number, but in a few of his fights that I have seen, he has been held up against the fence and controlled there for some time. But it does look like his offensive striking does check out, does have good pop on his punches, pretty good accuracy, and pretty good power overall. His opponent, Vargas, is a bit wild on the feet in terms of striking, but I believe he is primarily a grappler. And, he's been pretty inactive and, is a bit older for the division as well. So, yeah, he is 35, and at lightweight, I mean, that's not like too bad or anything, but it is getting there. And for someone who is a grapple-heavy fighter, I tend to want to fade them, since at 35, that's when the cardio starts to dip a bit. And for someone who's primarily a grapple, or at least a grapple-heavy fighter, that's not a really good sign. And, I know I bring up the age thing a lot, but I think it does play a factor here. Like we saw in his fight against Alex da Silva, who, in his defense is a pretty solid fighter. He was largely just controlled that whole fight. His age was shown a bit there. And against Brock Weaver, he was winning that fight before he landed that illegal knee, but it looked like he was starting to tire that fight. So I think if the fight had actually continued beyond that point, I'm not 100% convinced he would have won it, but that's just my opinion. And yeah, he did look like he started to gas out a bit after that first round against Silva. So as far as this matchup goes, though, I think that Zhu will have probably an advantage standing. I think he'll be the cleaner, crisper striker. Although, his output will be a little bit lower. I think he'll be landing the more impactful shots over the course of 3 rounds. And I think Vargas, coming in, he will probably look to grapple a bit. I think he'll have some success in that first round, maybe a part of that second round, but I see Vargas gassing out, honestly, getting a bit tired after that first round, especially if, Zhu is able to, fend off the takedown, is able to work his way back up. I think Vargas will be exerting a lot more energy trying to control and hold Zhu down. And then going into the second and third round, I think that Vargas probably won't have enough to continuously look to grapple. I see Zhu moving or pulling ahead in the striking and possibly getting a knockout later in the fight. So I'm going to pick Zhu here, but this is, in my opinion, still a pretty low-level fight. I mean, we're still on the prelims here. Zhu, he's still kind of green, even though, he has 20 fights. A lot of these fights have been, I'd say, against fairly low-level fighters. But, I mean, the striking is there. I think that, against an older fighter like Vargas, he should be able to get it done. I don't really agree with the line here, especially for someone who is making their UFC debut. I wouldn't lay the minus, 250 on him, but I am going to pick him to win. I think that if he does win, it'll likely be, a decision or, just doing a bit more damage over the course of 3 rounds. But I might put a little bit on the round 3 knockout prop for Zhu, just because, I think that if Vargas does start to slow down, Zhu will be able to start landing some pretty heavy shots on him. So the pick here is Zhu. No bet just yet, but I am eyeing the round 3 prop for him. And to cap off the early prelims, we have Danaa Batgerel versus Kevin Natividad. So taking a look at the odds, Batgerel is the minus 165 favorite. The comeback on Natividad is plus 145. So taking a look at Batgerel first, this guy's primarily a striker. He likes to move forward, and his output is kind of low. It looks like he's really only throwing single shots most of the time, and really likes to throw those hooks, mainly that left hook. But outside of that, I don't really think he even has much power. I think that he's pretty reliant on just landing clean with one of those hooks. And, he did get a KO in his most recent fight against Guido Connelly, but, Connelly's a 40-year-old guy and, way past his prime, obviously. So I'm not going to take too much from that knockout. And, he did lose to Alateng, which, a little suspicious. I did think he won that fight, but I guess maybe Alateng was landing the harder shots. Can't say I completely agree with the decision, but, it is what it is. But overall, I don't think Batgerel has really fought anyone of note. His opponent, Kevin Natividad, also primarily a striker as well, and pretty low output. I'd say both of these guys are similar level, similar fight style. And, as far as his striking goes, he's got a decent jab and right cross. And, he will go to the well with a lot of the same strikes. And, again, he does like to pressure. And something I did notice about him, he was struggling a bit with the jab of John's. However, I don't think that'll be too big of a concern this fight. Batgerel's not really someone to pump the jab out much. This guy's, again, just primarily throwing hooks. And, with Natividad, it does seem like he has a bit of a grappling game as well. I've seen him, shoot for the double and, look to cage push a bit. So I guess he does have a slight advantage in the offensive grappling, although haven't really seen much from, Batgerel's, wrestling or grappling at all. But as far as a pick goes, I'm going to go with Natividad here. I don't know why Batgerel is, a slight favorite here. I think this should be, a pick 'em fight, honestly. Both guys have a pretty similar fight style, pretty low output, pretty low-level striking, in my opinion. And, I guess Batgerel does have the slight KO upside because he's always throwing those hooks, but he doesn't have a lot of power, like I said before, and his output is pretty low. I think whoever is the one pressuring this fight will have a bit more success and will likely be the one that's going to win it on the scorecards here. But again, I lean Natividad because I feel like his level of competition is a little bit higher. Not by much, though, but I also like the grappling of Natividad. I've seen him go to it a little bit more. And, if he's able to accumulate some control time, I definitely think that he could grind out a decision here. Overall, just not a really great read on either fighter. I'd say this applies to the whole early preliminary card. I mean, I wouldn't go too hard betting the early prelims just because I feel the whole early prelims just feels like a regional card at this point. So very low level fights, a lot of variance. So I wouldn't go too crazy with the bets here. But yeah, going back to this fight, I am going to favor Natividad a bit more, and I feel like this is a dog or pass situation. I really don't have much confidence in Batgerel. I think this is essentially a coin flip fight, but I am going to go with Natividad, and most likely will not be betting this fight. All right, so we're moving on to the prelims here, where level of competition is starting to increase a little bit, a little more compelling matchups, and maybe a few more bettable fights. So yeah, to start off the prelims, we have Pat Sabatini versus Tristan Connelly, and the odds for this are Connelly or Sabatini at minus 250, Connelly plus 210. And let's start with Sabatini. So Sabatini on the feet, he is got pretty decent striking. I'd say it's kind of passable. It's not his strong suit, but he is pretty light on the feet. Lots of movement, lots of feints, and we'll throw some spinning attacks. But he is primarily a grappler, in my opinion. He's got a black belt in jiu-jitsu, and in a lot of his fights, I've seen him take his opponents to the fence, look to clinch him up there. He will look for knees and trips along the fence, and will definitely look for submissions once the fight is on the ground. And he will work the ground and pound, but I don't think it's too damaging or anything. I think he just really does it to stay active and look to create openings, not so much to beat his opponents to a pulp or anything on the ground. And taking a look at his opponent, Tristan Connelly, so I'd say his claim to fame is when he beat Michel Pereira on short notice. He came in, Pereira was throwing spinning attacks, doing backflips, and pretty much just gassed himself out. And Connelly was able to just out-grapple him and grind out a decision in that fight. And, Connelly, he was pretty undersized in that fight. And even though that Pereira was gassing himself out, it was kind of impressive that Connelly was able to control him in a lot of the grappling exchanges. Connelly is primarily a grappler as well, but he's been extremely inactive and is getting a bit up there in age. He'll be, let's see here. Yeah, he'll be 35 at the time of this fight. So yeah, the inactivity and the age and the layoff, it's not a great look here. And, as far as how this fight will play out, I think that Sabatini should be able to get the victory here. This guy, he's shown to have pretty solid striking and pretty solid grappling. Just overall a pretty well-rounded fighter. I do have to note that Connelly will have a bit of a size advantage, although you really have to wonder how the weight cut is going to go for him. He's 5'10" at, I believe this fight is going to be at lightweight, and his last weigh-in against Pereira, he weighed in at 169, so really have to see how he looks on the scales come fight day. But as far as this matchup goes, though, I think Sabatini should have the advantage on the feet. And I'm not sure if he'll have too much success with the grappling, as Connelly does seem to have pretty decent grappling himself. And like I said before, he will likely have the size and maybe the strength advantage. So I think that for Sabatini to win, I think he could honestly just keep it on the feet. The striking of Connelly doesn't seem that good. And, with the long layoff and everything, I think he's probably going to be a bit rusty in there. So if I'm Sabatini, I'd probably just look to strike with him and maybe go to the grappling a little later in the fight, really just to win the round. So, yeah, as far as the pick goes, I'm going to go with Sabatini. The line does feel a little bit wide here, but, I just don't see too many paths to victory for Sabatini. Maybe Sabatini, or not Sabatini, but Connelly. Maybe if Connelly is able to get a hold of Sabatini and just grind him out for 3 rounds, he could eke out a decision, but I don't think that's too likely. Sabatini is pretty solid on the ground. He's got good scrambles as well. And with the age and layoff for Connelly, I'm not sure if he will be able to have a, grapple-heavy game plan. So I'm going to go with Sabatini here, but, minus 250 seems a little steep for someone who's, essentially making their UFC debut. So, yeah, I don't think I'll bet this fight, but as far as the pick goes, I will go with Sabatini. And in the next fight, we have Brendan Allen versus Karl Roberson. And this one's going to be a pretty good one. I'd say the first compelling matchup on the card. So let's start with Roberson, or let's start with Allen first. And before we do that, actually, let's start with taking a look at the betting odds here. So Brendan Allen is going to be the minus 130 favorite. Comeback on Roberson is plus 110. But yeah, going back to Allen here, so he got exposed a little bit in his last fight, in my opinion. His striking, it's not great, and defensively is very bad. And in his fight against Sean Strickland, he really got pieced up pretty bad in that fight. He actually ended up getting knocked out, and he's primarily a grappler in my opinion, but his wrestling isn't that great, and he doesn't really shoot that much takedowns. In a lot of his previous fights, we actually see his opponents, take him to the ground. And from there, he's able to scramble and, work his submissions, look to sweep, look to get into transitions. But, a lot of the time, he's not the one initiating the takedowns. I mean, he will, but in a lot of the fights that he's been in, the fight just ends up somehow getting to the ground without him, actively shooting for the takedown. So that's definitely something to consider there. And, on the ground, he does have pretty good, jiu-jitsu. But, it's just the issue is getting it there. And with Roberson, he's got pretty good kickboxing, pretty light on the feet for someone his size. He's got a really heavy low kick. And, his grappling, though, still needs a little bit of work on. Defensively, he's not that great, although I have seen him, sweep and, reverse positions. But I think a lot of that is just due to his size. He's a pretty big middleweight. In fact, I think he actually missed weight a couple of times in his previous fights. But as far as this matchup goes, though, I am going to have to favor Roberson here. I think that, he's going to be the better fighter on the feet. He's got better kickboxing, and I think that it'll kind of play out similarly to the Strickland fight, where Roberson will be able to land pretty cleanly on Allen on the feet. It's just that on the ground, I do give the advantage to Allen, but he is pretty undersized in my opinion. Roberson, we have seen him struggle a bit in the grappling against, decent grapplers in Vittori, obviously, and Glover Teixeira. But, and against, grapplers who are still a bit green, like Wellington Turman, he was able to reverse positions and get back to his feet pretty well. And, a lot of those guys are pretty big and strong too, right? Whereas with Allen, he's kind of wiry for the division. And if you look at the guys he's been able to out grapple, guys like Kyle Daukaus, Kevin Holland, these guys, they're pretty wiry and thin guys themselves. I think in this matchup, he'll have a really hard time, getting his hands on Roberson, getting him to the ground, and probably even controlling him. I think that Roberson will likely be able to explode out of a lot of positions, or maybe even be able to stuff a lot of the takedowns. So I have a hard time seeing Allen getting this fight to the ground and even controlling Roberson there. So I'm going to favor Roberson here. I think he'll likely take it with his striking. I think he could outbox Allen to a decision and possibly even get a knockout. We've seen, Allen take a ton of damage in his fight against Strickland, and, if his defense hasn't been shored up there, I see him taking a lot of damage from Roberson too. The pick here is Roberson, and this is the first fight on the card that I do have a bet on. Roberson at plus one, you can get him around plus 110, but in certain books you can get him at plus 120, but I'd say plus 110's, the average for what you can get him for. But Roberson actually opened up as a much bigger dog, like high plus like 170 actually. So not a ton of value on him now, but I do think that he still wins. I think that he actually should be the favorite here. So I think there's still a bit of value here on Roberson at plus money. I think that if the fight does get to the ground, he will be in a bit of trouble just because Allen, he's pretty slick with his jiu-jitsu. But, with Roberson, he's a big, strong guy. I don't think Allen's going to have too much success on the ground here, even if he is able to get the fight to the ground. So the pick here is Roberson, and I do have a 1.5 unit bet placed on Roberson. And moving on to the next fight, we have Dwight Grant versus Stefan Sekulić. Dwight Grant is going to be the minus 235 favorite. Comeback on Sekulić is plus 200. And this card is looking pretty chalky so far. Lots of pretty dangerous spots. But taking a look at Grant, I mean, he is primarily a striker. Really funky body shape, honestly. Really long limbs. small torso in comparison, but he's got really heavy hands. And I do want to mention that he can, throw going backwards, which, you don't see that too much here. So it makes him kind of dangerous even when he is backing up. And, although his power or his output isn't the highest, he does seem to pack quite a punch. And really, that's kind of the issue you see with a lot of these guys who, have a lot of power. They're not going to throw too much because they don't want to gas themselves out. But, that seems to be the thing with Grant here. He also doesn't mix it up too much. This guy's primarily a headhunter. I mean, he will throw in a few kicks, but overall, he's just looking to take your head off with a lot of his strikes. And, he's got decent range management and is pretty hard to hit. And, I'd say his takedown defense is pretty solid as well. And we saw in his last fight against Rodriguez, he was able to hurt Rodriguez, but looked like he might have overcommitted a little bit. Wasn't able to get Rodriguez out of there, even though I feel like the fight could potentially have been stopped. It didn't, though, so Rodriguez was able to recover, and, after Grant punched himself out a bit there, he tired out and ended up getting knocked out. But, yeah, we see in a lot of his other fights, he's able to get his opponents out of there early, and, he did take Joban to a split decision. And again, that is another issue we see with these guys who are, knockout reliant, where if they aren't knocking the opponent out, they tend to struggle a bit once it gets to a decision since their output isn't the highest. And, if they're not visibly hurting their opponent, their low output kind of bites them a bit later into the fight when, it gets to the scorecards. But taking a look at his opponent, Sekulić, so on the feet, decent, not that great. I mean, he's got a good leg kick. He's got a pretty dangerous straight left. Seems to have a bit of power too, but I believe he is primarily a grappler from what I've seen. I haven't seen too much though. But yeah, he does seem to have some good clinch striking, good clinch elbows. And, we'll look to take opponents down, control him there. And, in his fight against Amiv, it did look like he got hurt there, but was able to recover and, eventually did get grinded out by Amiv. But Amiv, he is pretty much a decisionator in the UFC, so I can't hold that against him too much. He was making his debut there as well. But as far as how this matchup will go, I do favor Grant a bit more on the feet. He's got a pretty significant height and reach advantage, I want to say. No, actually, he's only got 1 inch height and reach advantage, so he won't actually have that much of a size advantage over Sekulić, but I do believe he has the striking advantage. Again, he can strike going forward, he can strike going backwards. I think he'll be dangerous for most of the fight, especially the first round, but again, he has got good power, so definitely the more dangerous striker. But Sekulić, he is coming off a pretty long layoff. So the last time he fought was in 2018, late 2018, so about a year and a half off, and he's still pretty young, so we don't know what kind of improvements he could be making. And he doesn't seem like a total bum, so I think he could definitely give a good account of himself. And with how heavy he throws, I think he could definitely catch Grant too. And if he does go to his grappling, I could see him potentially grinding out a decision as well. So while I do think that Grant should win just based off of his striking, I'm not going to bet this fight. I think if anything, Sekulić might be worth a stab just because I feel like the odds are a little bit off. Plus 200 on Sekulić, not a bad look, especially since I feel like this isn't a super high-level fight. And, if Sekulić, again, goes to his grappling, I think he can definitely grind out a decision here. So I'm going to side with Grant. He's a little more active, and, I favor striking a little more. But I wouldn't bet him at minus, 250 here. So the pick here is Grant, but no bet just yet. If anything, I'm looking at the underdog, Sekulić. And to cap off the prelims, we have Randy Brown versus Alex Oliveira. Randy Brown is going to be the minus 160 favorite. Comeback on Oliveira is plus 140. And let's take a look at Brown first. So Brown, he's a very tall, lanky fighter. Tends to stand a bit heavy on his lead leg, but generally uses his length pretty well. He's got pretty good, striking at length, at range. He's got very good, clinch striking as well. He's got good clinch knees and elbows. The only concern I really have for him is his defensive grappling. His takedown defense isn't bad or anything. It's just that once the fight is taken to the ground, he seems to struggle a bit with getting back up and, I have seen him spend good chunks, of a round on his back. So that definitely is a concern, especially going into this fight against Oliveira, where, Oliveira, he will shoot the takedown and really just lay on top of his opponent. So definitely something to consider here. But yeah, taking a look at Oliveira, it's pretty low output. But again, he's one of those guys who really likes to load up on his punches, although they are a bit telegraphed. He does have a decent leg kicking game as well. Pretty heavy body and leg kicks. And like I said before, he does have pretty solid grappling, and he's a pretty strong guy as well. Although his cardio is a bit questionable, and he's a pretty strong guy in the clinch. But the issue with Oliveira is you just don't know if he's really going to show up. There's a number of fights where he's just not very in it. I mean, he's not really showing any sort of urgency, and he's kind of just coasting a bit in there and really just kind of surviving in a lot of the situations. So this guy, if you're going to bet him, it would usually be at plus odds. I wouldn't bet this guy as a favorite. He doesn't really fight for your money, and that just is a concern when going with someone like Oliveira. But I think he does have all of the tools in this matchup to win. It's just whether or not he's really got his mind set to win. But as far as this matchup goes, I do favor Brown on the feet. I think he's the better distance striker, and if he is able to keep it standing, I think he can definitely win the decision here. He can definitely touch up Oliveira, but yeah, I don't think Oliveira is going to look to keep this fight standing for too long. Oliveira likely will look to clinch up with him, maybe line a few elbows, but I think Oliveira is probably going to look to take this fight to the ground. But on the feet, I think he'll probably throw a few leg kicks, just because Brown, he does stand really heavy on his lead leg, and we did see Luque target it quite a bit in this fight and was able to, I think, kind of hurt him a bit with the leg kicks. So definitely see Oliveira going to the kicks there. And if he does go to his grappling, I think he will have a bit of success there as well. I do favor Brown a bit more on the feet, but I'm not sure he'll keep it standing. So, as far as the pick goes, I can't believe I'm saying this, but I'm going to go with Oliveira here. I think that, if he shows up and he puts on a good performance, I definitely think that he can win here. It's just that with Brown, his path to victory really is just have to keep the fight standing and just outbox Oliveira for 3 rounds, which, definitely can happen, but I think his path to victory is much slimmer than, say, for Oliveira, who, can keep it somewhat competitive on the feet, in my opinion, and then look to tie him up and, accumulate some control time. So, as far as the pick goes, I'm going to go with Oliveira. I just think that he's got more tools to win. He's got more paths to victory, whereas with Brown, he's got to pretty much win it with his striking. As far as a bet goes, though, I haven't put anything on this fight yet, but it looks like more money is coming in on Brown. And, if he's going to get bet, straight up or even put in parlays and it starts to widen up a bit more, I might take a small shot on Oliveira, especially if he starts getting more towards the plus 150 range. Just because I feel this fight should be a bit closer to a pick'em, maybe a slight, lean towards Brown at minus 130, 140 or so, but as of right now, I don't see too much value on Oliveira, but if he starts to, creep up towards the, again, the 150 range, I might take a small stab on him. The pick here is Oliveira. No bet just yet, but if the line does widen up, I will put a small, maybe half a unit or a unit bet on Oliveira here. And kick off the main card, we have Anthony Smith versus Jimmy Crute. Crute is going to be the minus 190 favorite. Comeback on Smith is plus 165. And let's start with Anthony Smith. So Smith, very well-rounded fighter. He's pretty skilled everywhere, in my opinion. The main issue I got with him is, he's only 32, but he's taken so much damage. I'd say he's, about 42 in fight years. Very, again, well-rounded skill set. He's good on the feet, good on the ground, solid BJJ. But, he's been fighting since, 2008 and is very shop-worn. So the durability, a little bit of a concern here. And also just the wear and tear on the body, over the course of, all of these, fights and wars that he's been in. It's going to have, it's going to take a toll on his body. And, in a lot of his fights, even in the ones he's winning, he's getting his ass beat before, he's able to find the submission. So that's definitely a concern in this fight. And, his opponent, Jimmy Crute, really, really dominant wrestler in my opinion. Very heavy top control, very solid ground and pound. On the feet, he's not bad, but I think it's definitely a part of his game that still needs a bit of development. Although, it's coming along pretty well. He was able to get the knockout on Bukauskas, so, it does seem like he has some power, but I think he just kind of caught Bukauskas there. Wouldn't take too much from that fight, but yeah, his best work is primarily done on the ground. But as far as this matchup goes, I will have to favor Crute here. We have seen, Smith controlled on the ground for extended periods, so that is, very clear path to victory for Crute. The only thing keeping me off this fight from a betting perspective is really the fact that Crute is still somewhat unproven. We did see in that fight against Serkinov where, he was beating Serkinov for most of that first round. He just kind of overextended himself, got a little overzealous, and, gave up good positioning in that fight and ended up, eventually getting choked out. So that is a little concern there. I think he has to show that, he's worked on, his composure a little bit. So that is definitely something to consider. And, I do want to mention, I think he lost a round to Paul Craig as well. So not a terrible look because he eventually did get the win there. But in a lot of his other fights, he's been getting his opponents out of there pretty early in the first round. So he's got to show me that he can go a full 3 rounds as well, right? So I don't know if I want to lay minus, 190 on him just yet. I think, if he's able to beat Smith here pretty soundly, answer a few questions there, I think that he might be a safer bet moving forward. But, Anthony Smith, despite being an older fighter, or not an older fighter, but just more shop-worn fighter, I think he's still got all the tools. He's still pretty dangerous. Like we saw in his fight against, Devin Clark, he knew he had the BJJ advantage, and so he just dragged him to the center of the octagon and just started working on his submissions there. So this is potentially another fight where, if Crute isn't careful, if he overexerts himself or, finds himself out of position, Smith could very likely snatch up a submission, put, Crute in a very compromising situation. So that is a bit of a concern there going into this fight. And, on the feet, I would say that Smith has a bit of an advantage still. Crute still is very unpolished with his striking. So I think that, he is still pretty reliant on his grappling to win this fight. And he very well could because Smith, his defensive grappling isn't great. He will spend large chunks of a round on his back. So I will favor Crute to win in this matchup. I think, if he's able to stay on top of Smith, he could just grind out a decision. But I don't want to lay minus 190 on him just yet. So the pick here is Crute and no bet for this fight. And moving right along, we have Chris Weidman versus Uriah Hall. And pretty interesting matchup here. This is essentially a pick'em with Chris Weidman being at minus 115, Hall at minus 105. And I kind of agree with where it's set at. This is a pretty close fight on paper here. So let's take a look at Hall first. Hall had a pretty disappointing career, if I'm being honest. It never really lived up to the hype. But, as far as what he does well, we kind of know the deal with him. Really good jab, really good power, but that's about it. He doesn't really have any, really high output at all. And, as far as his grappling goes, he's not really going to shoot a takedown or anything. Although he does seem to have decent takedown defense, but he's a really one-dimensional fighter. He's really just looking to pump the jab, and that's pretty much it. Yeah, it's really effective. I'll give him that. But outside of that, I don't see him having much success in this fight. That being said, though, his opponent Weidman, very good wrestler, very solid wrestling. The issue is he's been relatively inactive and seems to be a bit chinny. He's been knocked out in 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 out of his last 7 fights. So that is a massive concern here. If, it wasn't for his chin issues, I'd be taking this bet, no hesitation. But, with how much power that Hall packs and, just how quick his jab is, I don't know if I don't know if Weidman's going to be able to survive the power of Hall here, especially as the fight goes on. I definitely see, Weidman having a bit of success with his grappling early, but we saw in his fight against Akhmedov, he was completely gassed going into that second, third round. But so was Akhmedov. So good on Hall being able to, or not Hall, but Weidman for being able to gut it out. And if it comes down to it, maybe he will be able to just lay on top of Hall for extended periods. But Hall, he's got pretty good takedown defense. I think if he's able to keep it standing for extended periods of time, he can have quite a bit of success on the feet. And I just got to say, with the striking of Weidman, we did see him open up with that karate stance going into his fight with Akhmedov. Looks like he's been training with Wonder Boy a little bit. But as far as this matchup goes, I think you can go with either side here, but I'm going to go with Hall. I think that on the feet, he's just much more dangerous. But, Weidman, he's got a style that's more conducive to winning rounds, especially, if he's able to put Hall up against the fence, grind out on him, just lay on top of him, work a bit of that ground and pound. He'll likely win the rounds that way, but I'm just going to side with the guy who's got the better stand-up and is going to be a bit more dangerous on the feet. So I'm going to pick Hall, but this is a very low-confidence fight. I could see it going either way. As far as the bet goes, though, I think maybe you take Hall by knockout or Weidman by decision. So that's some of the props I'm looking at. But as far as the pick goes, I'm going to go with Hall. And I'll just wait for some of the props to come out before I, put anything on it. So pick is Hall. And if I were to take a prop for this fight, it'd likely be Hall by knockout or Weidman by decision. And in the first title fight of the night, we have Valentina Shevchenko versus Jessica Andrade. And Shevchenko is going to be the minus 365 favorite. Comeback on Andrade is plus 300. And let's start with the champ here. So Shevchenko, she is extremely well-rounded, right? She's got great striking and great grappling, and I don't think anyone even comes close in the division. Usually when you see someone who's, elite in one department, there might be some other fighters who can kind of beat them maybe in something else. Like if they're a great striker, there might be another great wrestler who's able to out-wrestle them. But with Shevchenko, I don't think anyone can really beat her at anything she's good at. But this is going to be a pretty tough fight for Andrade. But as far as, Shevchenko goes, she's got really good striking, like I said before. You can kind of see this in a lot of, the Tiger Muay Thai fighters where, output isn't particularly great, but they put so much into their shots that you could really see their opponents react to a lot of their, body kicks or punches because they really sit down on a lot of their shots. They like to, walk opponents down, pressure them, and really just pick them apart. And then as far as her grappling goes, I mean, she's got pretty good timing on her level changes, good wrestling, and good top control. And really, to top it all off, Shevchenko's, quite athletic. She's in great shape. A lot of the other fighters in the division, aren't really quite on that level, from a technical standpoint and from an athletic standpoint. So you can kind of see why she's been so, dominant in this division. Of course, the division is pretty shallow, but even if it wasn't, I'd say, Shevchenko would still be a pretty dominant champ. However, I do have to mention, for as good as she's looked in all of her fights, we did see that, she did have a slight weakness in her last fight, right? Where Jennifer Maia was able to hold Shevchenko up against the fence for extended periods, and she was really having quite a bit of success, with the cage pushing. There was a few minutes where, Maia, was able to put Shevchenko up against the fence and control her there for quite some time. And that definitely made the fight a little interesting, at least after that second round. But Shevchenko was able to, get her grappling game going for the rest of that fight and win a pretty dominant decision. But that did expose a little bit of a weakness for Shevchenko. And, if anyone is able to pull that off again, it might be Andrade, who, in my opinion, is going to be a bit stronger than Maia. But I have to assume that Shevchenko's been working on that. That was a pretty glaring flaw in her game. So I have to assume she, been, shoring that up. But taking a look at her opponent, Andrade, so something I do want to point out right away is that, her head movement has looked much improved going into that fight, or her second fight with Rose. If you look at Their first fight, she was super stiff, and she was getting touched up pretty badly. For most of the fight, she was just moving forward, keeping her head on the center line, and just getting tagged up, and was just walking into the punches of Rose. And in that second fight, she made the adjustment. Her head movement improved quite a bit. Obviously, she probably didn't need to move her head that much, at distance, but I think it was still giving Rose a bit of trouble finding the target. So I guess it kind of worked in that sense. But what I was kind of impressed with the most was, her head movement in the pocket, where she was able to slip and roll with punches much better. And, she gave a much better account of herself against Rose. Granted, Rose did still win that fight. Although, Andrade, she was really picking it up in that third round and was giving Rose a lot of trouble. So that's definitely good to see on Andrade's end, where, before she would just walk forward and wing those hooks. Whereas now we're starting to see, her develop her striking a little bit more, instead of just relying on walking forward and landing those hooks. So that was a good, learning experience for her. And then, in her fight with Chookagian, probably one of the funniest moments in MMA, in my opinion, where she just lands those body shots on Chookagian. Chookagian just kind of crumples over and just lets out like the loudest groan ever, and just turns away. But that was a really ridiculous end to the fight there. But the fact that Andrade was able to get a title shot, off of just one win in this division, just kind of goes to show how shallow the division really is. But as far as this matchup goes, though, I still am going to have to favor Shevchenko quite a bit here. I mean, she's still the much more technical striker, despite, all the improvements that Andrade has shown. I think that, Shevchenko still levels above Andrade, and I think her grappling is still better than Andrade's, at least if she decides to be the one, the aggressor, if she's the one going for the takedowns. However, I do have to say that out of all of the title challengers so far, Andrade seems like the most complete human being by far. Sorry, wrong notes here. But yeah, I'd say out of all of the title challengers so far for Shevchenko, I think that Andrade is, the most dangerous. And, I specifically say title challengers because I'm not going to count Nunes there. And while, Joanna was a good challenge for Shevchenko, I don't think that she has quite the stopping power of Andrade. But I'd say that's really as far as it goes, right? I think that with Andrade, it really just comes down to having a puncher's chance because, she's got a lot of power. She's very explosive, but she's still giving up a lot of size in this fight. And she's still going to be the less technical fighter. And I still think that Shevchenko's got her outgunned pretty much everywhere. That being said, though, Shevchenko's still a minus 360 favorite, but compared to, where all of the other title challengers stand, this is probably the closest we've seen her in quite a while. But yeah, outside of, Andrade landing a clean shot on Shevchenko, I just don't really see her winning this. I did mention before Shevchenko did seem to struggle against, Maya up against the fence, and, maybe Andrade decides to go to her grappling here, but yeah, I don't know. I think Shevchenko still takes it. I think that Shevchenko is going to be able to match the physicality of Andrade pretty well. Although, we might start seeing a bit of a decline for Shevchenko. I mean, it might be that time, but I think she's still got a little more in her. So yeah, I'm going to go with Shevchenko here. As far as a bet goes, though, this might be the most bettable line we'll see on Shevchenko in quite a while. So I wouldn't be too against putting Shevchenko in a parlay, but still the odds are a little bit whack, though. But yeah, I'm going to go with Shevchenko here. I think that, with how predictable some of the head movement of Andrade is, I wouldn't be surprised if Shevchenko was able to get a knockout on Andrade. But I'm not really sure what kind of game plan Andrade is going to come in with. I'm not really sure what kind of game plan Shevchenko is going to come in with, but I'm pretty sure with whatever it is, she'll have the advantage there. So I'm going to favor Shevchenko quite a bit here. So the pick here is Shevchenko. I don't have a bet on her just yet, but I might be looking at like a KO prop or something because I think there's a chance that Shevchenko is able to knock Andrade out. But yeah, no bets just yet. But the pick here is Shevchenko. And in the second title fight of the night, we have Zhang Weili versus Rose Namajunas. Weili is going to be the minus 200 favorite. Comeback on Rose is plus 170. And let's start with Rose for this one. So Rose, very very good boxer. She's got really good footwork, good head movement, and very accurate striking, in my opinion. And, she seems to have quite a bit of sting in her shots, too. And I definitely feel that it is due to her accuracy and her timing. So, yeah, as far as her stand-up goes, I think it's top-notch, probably one of the best strikers in the division. She does seem to have decent grappling, too. She will occasionally shoot for a takedown. And, her takedown defense isn't great, but, she will attack submissions to defend takedowns. Her jiu-jitsu is solid as well, but she will give up position to go for submissions, which, don't really like. But, she's primarily a striker, and, her striking, again, is elite, I'd say, for the division. And her opponent, Zhang Weili, pretty well-rounded fighter, too, in my opinion. Very, she's got good hands, good footwork as well, good counters, good striking as well, although I would have to say that Rose is a bit more technical and probably does have the advantage with the striking, although I wouldn't say it's by much. Defensively, Weili is a bit hittable. She does keep her head on the center line, but she is someone who is willing to bite down and throw the counter. And from what we've seen in her fight with Joanna, she's very tough. She will continue to move forward even if she is taking damage. And as far as her grappling goes, she does have pretty solid clinch work, good clinch knees and elbows. And, she does have, good offensive grappling too. That's something that I feel like is a bit overlooked in this matchup. Because in a lot of her fights, Weili has been able to accumulate a good amount of control time and is able to find herself in, dominant, positions. But as far as how this fight will play out, I think a lot of people think that this is going to be largely a stand-up fight. And, I think it will be to a certain extent. And, I definitely think that it'll be pretty close in terms of the stand-up. I think that, to begin with, Rose might be touching Weili up a little bit. But I think once Weili gets her timing down, she's going to be landing the heavier shots. And while I think the output of Rose might be a little higher to start the fight, I think that, Weili will be, again, landing the more impactful shots. Like we've seen in the Joanna fight where Joanna, she was having a bit of success early, but, Weili was starting to, get the timing on her counters a bit better. And she was really starting to bite down on her mouthpiece and just swing back. And we saw her landing the harder shots. And I think that's ultimately what won her the fight. Obviously the optics of the fight where, Joanna had that massive hematoma. But, you can't discredit Weili for giving her that hematoma. She's the one, she's punching her in the forehead. And that's what led to her getting the hematoma. So I don't think that you can take that away from her too much. And, in this fight, that could be what it comes down to. If we see Rose landing the more volume, but Weili's able to break Rose's orbital or something, and we see her wear the damage a little more, it could be something that the judges score in favor of Weili. But again, like I said before, I think what a lot of people are overlooking in this matchup is the grappling. And we did see Weili go for the, a takedown, look for the, the clinch in the fight with Joanna. But, Joanna's got really good takedown defense, and, she's really good at, keeping the fight standing. So Weili really didn't find any success in that fight. But if you look at some of her previous fights, she really does like to shoot the takedown, work in the clinch. And, this is something I definitely see her going to in this fight. Rose being the much, not much smaller, but she is going to be the less physical fighter in this matchup. I think that, Weili's going to be able to control Rose in a lot of these clinch and grappling exchanges. And I think that's essentially what will win her these rounds and the fight. So while I feel the fight may be pretty close on the feet, I think what'll set Weili apart is her grappling. So, yeah, as far as the pick goes, obviously I'm going to go with Weili here. And, like I said before, she is the second leg of my parlay. I had Tony Gravely hit. So if Rose is able to hit, or if Weili is able to win here, I'll essentially have gotten, near even odds. I did believe I put 2 units on it. And, yeah, I just think that, while the fight may be close on the feet, I think that Weili will win it, will edge it with her grappling. And, I'm not even convinced that Rose will necessarily win it in the striking exchanges. I think that again, the damage and the power of Weili will translate a little better onto the scorecards. But that being said, I mean, Rose is still dangerous, and we did see, I think Weili, she got rocked a little bit against Joanna, and I definitely feel that Rose can hurt Weili, but we've seen with Weili, very tough, and she was able to gut it out. So I'm not sure if she's going to be able to get the knockout here, because I think that's probably her best path to victory. I'm not sure if she could get the decision here, at least for Rose, that is. But yeah, the concern with Weili going into that Joanna fight was, if she had the cardio and, her technique. I think people were really thinking that Joanna was going to be the more technical fighter, but Weili showed that, while her defense isn't great, she's, got all of the offensive tools to hang with Joanna, and her going 5 rounds, I think really, wiped any sort of doubt that I had for her in regards to whether or not she can go, into the championship round. So I'm going to go with Weili here. I think that, I think she could edge out the decision here. And as far as, bets go, again, this is the second leg of a parlay for me, but something I am looking at here, probably not super, popular here, but I think that Weili could potentially win by submission, and I'm going to wait for the props to come out. I think that if it's a big juicy number, I might just take Weili by a submission, or put a little bit on that submission prop, since I think that her submission game, it's pretty solid actually. She's gotten a number of submissions in her previous fights. Not so much in the UFC, only one submission in the UFC, but in a lot of her regional fights, she does have a number of submission wins, and this could be a fight where we see Rose potentially get hurt and Weili is able to get the finish by submission, or just it might be a fight where Weili is just completely just outmuscles Rose on the ground and is able to sink in the rear naked choke or lock in an armbar later in the round. So I don't think that's a terrible look, but again, I'll have to see what the odds are on that. But yeah, possibly a submission prop, but the pick here is Weili. And in the main event, the third title match, we have Kamaru Usman versus Jorge Masvidal. Usman's going to be the minus 385 favorite. Come back on Masvidal at plus 320. And I just got to say, this is probably the most undeserved rematch ever. Masvidal literally did not do shit to deserve this rematch, but I guess Usman called for it because I guess he wanted to right the wrong, and I get it. I mean, that first win, while it was pretty dominant, pretty lopsided, I think Usman could have definitely won in a more emphatic manner. But we do have to consider in that fight, Usman was taking that fight on short notice, and we always look at Masvidal's side of things where he's coming in like a week notice, but Usman, he had to prepare for a completely new opponent as well, and he did say supposedly that week prior he was starting to put a bit of the weight back on and then had to start cutting again. So I'm not sure how much of that is true, but the short notice nature of that fight applies to both parties. So going into this fight, I don't think we're going to see too much of vastly different results or anything. I think that if anything, we'll see a more dominant performance by Usman, especially now that he's got a few weeks in his camp. He's making a pretty quick turnaround. Obviously, he's in shape, but this is someone he's gonna have. This is someone he called out, so I'm assuming this is something he's been working on. So yeah, I think he's just out here to make a point essentially, because in his last fight he could probably, rightfully so, got a lot of shit for using those foot stomps, and I said this before in his fight against Burns. Usman's historically not a foot stomper. He's not usually a wall installer like that. This guy usually puts on pretty dominant wrestling performances, and Usman said it himself. He's going to break Masvidal this fight, and I fully expect him to do so. I think he's going to go to his wrestling and put on a really dominant wrestling performance. Unfortunately, I don't really have like a crazy good analysis or breakdown for this fight, because we've essentially seen it. I mean, Masvidal, I just don't know if he can really make too many adjustments to his game that can give him the best shot. I mean, the guy is 36. He's well past his prime. He's got good hands and everything, and we did see Usman get knocked down by Burns, so definitely a little bit of a concern there. But we did see the toughness of Usman shine through, and I'm not sure if Masvidal is going to be able to catch Usman. Although I do have to say, in that last fight, Usman was catching the kicks of Masvidal, and that looked a little dicey there. I mean, if Masvidal is able to just, instead of go for the body kick or leg kick, switches it up and goes for like a head kick or something, he could potentially catch Usman. So I don't know if that's going to be a good idea to consistently try and catch those kicks. But yeah, I mean, I really don't see any other way for Masvidal to win this aside from catching Usman with a knockout. So I think Usman takes this pretty handily, pretty dominant decision. I wouldn't be completely surprised if Usman gets a finish here, but yeah, Usman's not really finishing anyone in the UFC. The only guys, I guess he's beating, via knockout are other grapplers who, he's beating with the stand-up. But, for this matchup, I don't think Usman's going to want to look to stand and trade with Masvidal. As much as, Usman has looked like he's improved with his striking, under the coaching of, Weidman. I don't know if, he still might be a step behind in terms of the striking against Masvidal. So I fully expect him to go to his wrestling here and just grind out a very, very, dominant decision. So yeah, obviously the pick here is going to be Usman. I don't have a bet placed on him, but I might just put him in a parlay. With how chalky this card is, I might actually have like a 3-legger here. But I don't know, maybe just keep it 2 legs and, eat the chalk here. And maybe hedge out with like Usman, or not Usman, but Masvidal by knockout. But yeah, we'll see. I think I might definitely have Usman in a few parlays, and if the other legs cash, maybe just hedge out with Masvidal here. But yeah, Usman, pretty comfortable pick here. And that'll do it for this card. And I just got to admit, there's a ton of chalk on this card. I don't have a lot of bets placed right now. So far, I only have Roberson and Weili, part of a parlay. But outside of that, I haven't really found too many good spots. I might kind of review this card and put together a few other parlays because, yeah, it's, again, super chalky. And I'm waiting for some of the props to open up as well before I lock in some of those props. But be sure to follow me, or at least check me out on Bet MMA Tips. I always have that linked in the description. That's where I always post all of my official plays. Still down for this year. I got to pick my spots a little bit better, but I'm pretty confident I can pull out of this. I'm still down about like almost 5 units for the year, but yeah, I think this is a good card to potentially bounce back on, and I think we got a few other good events coming up, but yeah, I got a bit of a hole to climb out of, so still working on that. And yeah, appreciate everyone for listening. Let me know what you guys think about some of these picks. And just a little shout out to everyone who's been, watching and subscribing. Really appreciate it. I mean, yeah, I've been getting a few new subscribers every week, and it's been really cool doing all this. But yeah, I hope you guys find some of these breakdowns useful. Still got a bit of work to do when it comes to like the betting, tips and stuff, but have been slowly working my way back in this. But yeah, again, just appreciate everyone listening, and I'll catch you guys next week.